Hi, thanks for inviting me into your home or office or wherever you're watching this month's video. You're going to read some exciting stories in this month's e-newsletter about what God is doing through one of our missionary families in Peru, about a recent opportunity we've had for the first time to train and equip a group of Christian workers in Haiti, and about what one of our missionaries is doing in Kenya, working among the Pokot, one of the unreached people groups in that country. Our featured project this month is the Foundry, a ministry located in the heart of the Paris Art District in France that is an amazing platform for evangelism and discipleship. I've had a close personal relationship for several years with Gustavo and Dalila Faleiro, a young Brazilian missionary couple working at the Foundry, so let me tell you about them. My first introduction to the Faleiros was in August of 2006 when we were conducting our first missions mobilization conference in Brazil. During the course of that conference, a young Brazilian pastor was asked to interpret several of the sessions for us. That pastor was Gustavo. I learned that he was pastor of a rapidly growing congregation in Rio de Janeiro, but he also was the owner of a recording studio and was himself a musician who had had considerable success in both the Christian and secular arenas in Brazil. It didn't take long to discover the remarkable potential of this young pastor. He was passionate about Jesus and about the gospel. He was deeply committed to missions, and in fact I discovered that he and his wife had already felt God's call on their lives to serve as missionaries themselves. Well, 9 months later, when Daryl and I were returning to Brazil for another 2 mission mobilization conferences, we invited Gustavo to join us as our interpreter. During the course of those 2 weeks, as our relationship deepened, we learned more about his plans. He and Dalila anticipated going to Paraguay as missionaries to work among the Toba Indians. But as we learned more about his ministry with young adults and his involvement in the contemporary music field, we began to tell him about the Foundry in France and suggested that he and Dalila might want to pray about going to Paris instead of Paraguay. Friends, the fact is that the population, the percentage of the population who are evangelical Christians is much lower in France than anywhere in South America. In fact, the challenge of re-evangelizing Western Europe is staggering. Well, as in the months ahead we shared more with Gustavo and Dalila, we were surprised to discover that God had actually put a burden on Dalila's heart for the people of France some years before, when she was still a high school student. So as she and Gustavo learned more about the opportunity at the Foundry, their response was enthusiastic. To share the whole story about how they ultimately got to France would take too long. But in a nutshell, the Mission Society had begun to collaborate with their denomination in Brazil, providing coaching and training for their church's emerging missionary sending enterprise. And because of that partnership, their church was able to appoint them to serve at the Foundry in collaboration with the Mission Society. I had the privilege of visiting Gustavo and Dalila and their young son Pedro in their new home in Paris last spring, just 6 or 7 months after they arrived in France. They were immersed in French language study, had already made wonderful connections with the surrounding community, and were looking forward to beginning their role as the pastoral couple at the Foundry. Today, God is using these young Brazilian missionaries to reach one of the most unreached population groups anywhere in the world for Christ, young urban Western Europeans. We feel humbled and honored to have had even a small part in mobilizing and equipping the Faleiros for their work at the Foundry, a ministry begun some years ago by one of the Mission Society's pioneer missionaries to France. I hope that this month you will prayerfully consider partnering with the Faleiros and their work at the Foundry. I also want to invite you to continue to help the Mission Society as we encourage and train young missionaries like Gustavo and Dalila from Latin America, Africa, and Asia to reach beyond their own borders with the good news of Jesus Christ.